Hi everybody, I'm Bob Wilson. I'm a singer-songwriter in San Antonio, Texas. Been writing songs since 1968. This is my 176th CD. I have 3,500 songs on YouTube. Right? No, I have 3,500 songs in my song catalog. I have 500 on YouTube. It's hard to fit them all. And check out YouTube, Bob Wilson, Roll Back to You. I'm doing educational videos now. You know, I'll be 70 in October, and I have so much. I have a great memory for my age, and some things history really I like, and so this one here, it is called 1940, John Lennon and his band, the Beatles. Okay, now I've done a lot of research the last 55 years. I've watched documentaries, I read things, so this is as accurate as I can be. For y'all who don't know, John Lennon started the Beatles. It's John Winston Lennon. He was born in England, I believe, in Liverpool, England. His father left. His father was a merchant seaman and left when he was 4 years old. His mom taught him how to play banjo, and then he progressed to guitar. And his mom left. I don't know, you know, when did she leave? But she left, and the aunt who was strict, actually raised him. He always had a chip on his shoulder. You know, you could always tell that he always had a chip on his shoulder. You know, and in 1956, he had a band called the Quarrymen. Okay, Paul McCartney came up and got up on stage when they were rehearsing and started playing a bunch of stuff from the 50s, from the American stuff. And so he joined the band. So, okay, John Lennon started the Beatles. We would not ever have the Beatles without John Lennon. Paul McCartney and John Lennon was on the greatest songwriting teams in history. Okay, George was a good friend of Paul's. And actually, Paul was saying, "Hey, I got a friend that plays guitar." And he said, "He plays lead guitar." And he said, "Well, okay. What I understand, they were on the double-decker buses, and they're on the top thing in England. And they're on the city bus, and George was doing his rehearsal, and so he got it." Okay, there was another guy who did the drums, but he wasn't really that good. You don't hear much about him really. Ringo Starkey. The thing about really they changed it to Ringo Starr. He had some kind of problem. I don't know if it was polio or something. He had a hard time. He had a hard time walking and things. People don't know that about Ringo. And Ringo was at a nun's hospital. So the sisters over there gave him a drum set, just to pass his time, and he got pretty good on the drums. So he became a session drummer. So they were, like I say, they were the Quarrymen, and then they finally changed it to the Beatles. I don't know exactly when, but they did change it to the Beatles. They were going to go to Germany, but the drummer, who wasn't really good anyway, he couldn't make it. So Ringo was a session drummer, and they said, "Hey, you want to go with us to Germany and play this gig?" Yeah, so he did. Let me tell you, the two things that made the Beatles: John Lennon and started it, Paul McCartney's fantastic songs. Okay, the long story here. Brian Epstein. Brian Epstein saw the Beatles at a club and loved their music and loved the personalities. His parents owned record stores in England. Now, other English groups have gone to the United States and never did any good. You know, they didn't really make it there. So Brian Epstein, you got to thank John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and Brian Epstein. Those are the ones who really made the beat, because Brian Epstein put it together. He put it together, and he said, "Let's make a #1 record here in England, and go over to America with the #1 record." That's what they did. Now we know John Lennon Paul McCartney's two of the best songwriting teams in history. George Harrison, one of the best guitar players ever, and Ringo Starr, one of the best drummers. And actually, Ringo was the most popular. I didn't know that, but they loved Ringo. Okay, all right. Okay, so when they got over to America and had the Beatlemania and everything, actually George had 104 fever for the Ed Sullivan show, but he still had to do it. So because they did it, and it came out smash and everything. They were the Beatlemania and everything, and John, who's always the far out Beatle, the ones that always says the things that sometimes piss people off. And he just made a comment in 1966 that Christianity, things he shouldn't have said, or said something and a reporter heard him that Christianity was religious Christian is dead, and we're bigger than Jesus or something. To some time comment, so it was crazy. They people started breaking their Beatle albums. The Ku Klux Klan, American Ku Klux Klan wanted to boycott their thing. After that, they said no more touring. We're just gonna do things. And another big blow to them. Brian Epstein accidentally overdosed on drugs and died. So that left them thing. Okay, Yoko, you cannot blame her for breaking up the Beatles. They were having problems before Yoko. Okay, John had his first wife, Cynthia, and had a son. And yes, he did kind of abandon her. He did. Julian, who sings just like John, was angry for years, but they finally amended. With Yoko, the thing about you don't understand. What I understand, John don't know how to drive. I heard one time that he bought him a Ferrari or something, but he didn't know how to drive, and he was terrible with money. He let Yoko handle his money, and he wasn't a good drinker. Two drinks, he was delightful. 3 or 4 drinks, he was out of control. So he needed somebody to watch him, and he didn't have a mother. And he used to call Yoko his mother. I think she's a little bit older than him. She handled his money and everything. Of course, when the Beatles broke up, there's so much here. I wrote all this stuff down, but I'm trying to tell you, when the Beatles never argued about money. It wasn't about money. It was John was experimenting, and Yoko's experimenting with heroin. I just found out they don't do it no more, but they experiment. And so John was having mood swings, and during 1969 and 70, around there, and say he broke up in 70. He was having mood swings, and the bands were trying to tolerate. Of course, having Yoko sit with John in the recording studios did not help. So it's hard. I seen interviews with Paul. Paul said they usually have three hour thing. Neither John or Paul would bring in a song, and they never had a bad session. They always made a song. George, who started writing songs, was upset because they would only let George put 1 or 2 of his songs on every album. George says, "Hey, I know John and Paul are the main songwriters, but let me put more of my songs on the album." They would never do that. That's really kind of upset him. And Ringo seemed happy, They made Ringo shave off his beard. They said, "You want to be a Beatle?" I said, "Okay, let me tell you a story." John inherited or got like 600 pounds or something, English money, from a relative. So him and Paul were going to go to Spain. So that's when they were like 17 years old. They didn't get as far as Paris, France. So in Paris, France, they found a guy who cut his hair. That's the Beatle haircut. A stylist from France made the Beatle haircut. Okay, let me tell you another story. There were dropouts. John and George, excuse me, John and Paul. I get these mixed. John and Paul, the main ones. They skipped school one day, and they were writing their first song together. And then Paul said, "Okay, this. She was only 17. She was my beauty queen." And John was the poet, and Paul was the melody. Although none of the Beatles knew how to read or write music. I don't either. I have 3,500 songs. I can't read or write music. They can't read or write music. And Jimi Hendrix, the same thing, could not read or write music. So, you music majors out there, I mean, you're doing a great job. But I hope you can. Well, my songs are popular. I'm not as popular as them, but I get them out there anyway. They're original. But they were one of their parents' kitchen, and Paul said, "She was only 17, was a beauty queen." And John said, "Wait a minute, take off that beauty queen." Says, "She was only 17, if you know what I mean." So they wrote songs really, really great together, and it's amazing. The world will never figure how these kids that are 18, 19, 20 could write such sophisticated songs. Because you could put most of the Beatles songs and put them to orchestras. These guys couldn't even write music. Put it to orchestras and just play fantastic. You hear it at high class places or hotels or hospitals or something. You hear Beatles songs. What else? Okay, when they broke up. Okay, the three songs you have to remember John Lennon by was, check out Working Class Hero. That's a story of his life. Working Class Hero. All You Need Is Love. And of course, after they broke up, 1 year after they broke up, he did the song Imagine, which is the song of the decade. He did that. John had a 99-acre mansion, huge mansion near New York, and they were out there. And John always felt sorry. He always felt guilty for the people that didn't have anything. You know, he's always for the underdog. I don't know if you know that. And one of he didn't have much security. That's his own problem. But his assistant saw some homeless guy sleeping in their garden, and he brought him in, and started talking to him and gave him breakfast, and actually I saw an interview on that. Another thing, John Lennon. Remember, some of the bitterness might come from John Lennon was he was born during the Nazi bombing of London and England, so he was born during war. Him and Paul too. I think all of them were born during. John was born 1940, right when Nazis were bombing England and everything. Let's see what else. His mother came back into his life for the second time, and he started to have a good thing with her. And she was leaving the aunt's house where John was living, and she got run over by a police off-duty police officer. But I found he wasn't drunk, but he must have been driving too fast, and he killed her instantly. So that kind of made him really bitter too. John, you could tell that bitterness in a lot of his stuff. Actually, he was arrested for marijuana, but some famous person lived in that apartment before him. I don't remember. I'm not going to say which one. It might have been Jimi Hendrix. It might have been the Rolling Stones. It was somebody who lived in that apartment before he did. And the cop was out to make a bust. And they busted his apartment like 8 o'clock in the morning. And of course, John's naked and everything. And, they sleep naked. And, and they put him clothes on. And they searched and they found this little bit of marijuana. Of course, when they came to the United States, the American government did not like John Lennon. They did not like John Lennon. I'm a big Richard Nixon fan. I think Richard Nixon was the best president we ever had. Watergate was baloney. I think the things that he did, he shouldn't have covered up. But you people ought to go back and see the accomplishments. Richard Nixon made that many accomplishments and that many mistakes. But that's the way it is. But Richard Nixon, didn't like him because he was talking to the Black Panthers. John was talking to, different things, and Richard Nixon was afraid that John Lennon could influence the 1972 re-election of his. He had the FBI. They're trying to get him deported. Let me tell you, John John um, John loved New York, and that was his downfall. He used to have an apartment. Get this, John Lennon, one of the best songwriters in the world. He used to have an apartment. This is the street in New York, and his was right off the sidewalk. And Ringo and everybody used to come over there because he didn't believe in security, and that was his real problem. It's true. He did not. He put his guitar next to his bed, and he didn't pick it up for 5 years. Of course, Yoko managed the money, managed everything, and he he just stayed home, was a house dad. He took care of his son Sean. Sean is a songwriter too. I'm not gonna say which one is my favorite, but Julian's been very, very successful. Sean's been some successful, but Julian does a lot of his own stuff. But he reconciled. I'm glad Julian reconciled, especially after John's death, with Yoko, and they were getting along. I saw some interviews; they were getting along good. Okay, what I understand was when John's father saw that John was famous, and in 1969, he's, voila, it's me. I left you when you were 4 years old, but now, and John was bitter. I heard, as only I heard, that his father's trying to get a recording studio off the ground, and John said, "Hey," told Brian Epstein, his manager, he says, "Don't make it happen. I don't want him to be successful." And I don't know if it was true or not, but he wasn't successful. What else? John, when they first broke up, I know that John was doing he got the Plastic Ono band. That's when they did Imagine. The Plastic Ono band was the name of it, and they were doing some concerts with Yoko, of course, right there, and the people rejected it. So John said, "I guess they don't want us." So here's the thing that some people don't know: Yoko, who was blamed for the Beatles, for the breakup of the Beatles and everything, she handled the $300 million of John. She handled all the paperwork. John didn't do none of that stuff. He called her mother. He depended on her for everything. That's why on the Double Fancy album, Woman and other songs, he wrote them to Yoko, how much he loves her. So Yoko had an assistant, this beautiful Oriental lady, like 24 years old, May Ping. She told John, "You're making me sick. I've been hearing that I broke up the Beatles and everything. I want you to have an affair with my much younger, beautiful station assistant." And they did. They went over, because they were living in New York. They went over to around California, and they got a beach house. And they had a great time. Actually, John told her, I heard, that May Pang, that he was going to divorce Yoko and marry her. And then, and everybody came over, because the guys didn't like coming over with Yoko. I don't think Yoko wanted, to be honest with you, I don't think Yoko wanted to see the other Beatles. Really didn't. I've seen one time when George was there, but when John was with May Pang for 18 months, they was over at their place, and they were like, John was being a kid again, drinking, partying. Beatles come over. He helped David Bowie on his album. He helped a lot of people there, on Elton John. It was a great 18 months, a great time. And then he come back, and May Pang says he promised to marry me, and he never did. So whatever that on that. Okay, John went on the Double Fancy album. He wrote all those songs in 3 weeks. He says they just came to him so fast after the pressure and everything, but he didn't believe much in security. Okay, the day of his death. Okay, Mark David Chapman, I heard was from Texas. I think he's from either Fort Worth or from Dallas, in one of those places. He moved to Hawaii. Hawaii. He moved to Hawaii, and is fixed on the Catcher of the Rye. That book, I never read it, and I heard I used to hear that he wanted to kill somebody famous, either the Queen of England or somebody famous. But John Lennon was so easy; there was no security. So he had a 38, and I heard different. Recently, he had a 38 pistol. He used to be a security officer, I heard, and he was married. He lived in Hawaii. He had a 38 pistol. He didn't know even if the bullets were any good or not. He flew from Hawaii to New York, and now he knows around noon. Another guy who was a really good friend of John and knew John real well. John got his haircut that morning. He had an interview with a radio interview. He was doing great. They just finished the Double Fancy album, which after his death came on #1 in a thing. Okay, so that he had his haircut that morning. They were doing some. They already finished the Double Fancy album. It was around noon. He doesn't drive, so a limousine picked him up, and his friend there, I know his friend's name, was a photographer. Actually took a picture of Mark Chapman, the one that killed him. Took a picture of John signing his name, and then, according to the Mark Chapman, who's still in prison, I don't know why he's still in prison. I don't know why he wasn't executed or somebody in prison didn't do him away. But that's another story. Mark Chapman said first. Mark Chapman, after he killed him, he was saying in interviews like he was a spokesman for the Beatles, for John Lennon. He was a spokesman for Yoko. He's just nuts. He was like 24 years old when he killed him, and John was 40, and Mark Chapman told John after he signed the thing. He told John when John was getting the limousine. He says, John said, "You want anything else?" And looked at him, and he says, John must have knew I was killing him. So Mark, this is the crazy story what happened. Mark was hiding in the bushes. And in fact, John's friend, the photographer, asked him, "Where are you from?" The guy said, "Oh, I'm from Hawaii." It says, you. And then when his photographer friend was that day was asking questions about different things, and Mark didn't want to say nothing. But Mark was hiding in the bushes. Now, they finished the recording station about 10 o'clock at night, and they were going to go eat, because they had a babysitter. Sean was about 5 years old then. They had a babysitter, and John said, "Hey, I want to go see Sean," his little boy. And Yoko said, "Let's go eat. And we can come back, and they usually don't go on the street. They usually go into the secure thing and drop them off. But John insisted, I want to go see Sean, So he stopped. The limousine was waiting. They stopped. John went in front, and then Yoko, or one or the other, I don't remember. I think Yoko was first and John was after. And Mark Chapman jumped out of the thing and says, "John," with his gun like that, and shot him. He shot 6 times. 5 hit him in the back. And then Mark Chapman sat there on the curb with the gun reading the book. And they called the police, and the bellman said, "You just shot John Lennon." "Yeah, I know." And they called the police, and then they put his lifeless body in a police car. They took it to the place over there, and to the hospital, and little rumors over there. Yoko was wearing a mink stole and everything, and they took over there, and there was a newspaper reporter who had a motorcycle accident, and he was on a gurney, one of those gurneys, and they heard John Lennon just got shot. And of course, called up, "Hey, news! John Lennon just got shot. Tell the world!" But he died. And Yoko said, "Please, don't tell no one till I can go home and tell my son my 5-year-old son. And she went and told Sean, and Yoko was screaming and yelling and everything in the waiting room. But when they came out with John's wedding rings, you know, okay, I don't know if you know this, okay, John, okay, Yoko still lives in the same apartment in the Dakota Building, which is next to Central Park, and the section right there. Now, John Lennon was cremated, and his ashes were spread over the area, across the street where he was killed, and they made they made a thing they called Imagine, and they call that area Central Park Strawberry Fields Forever. So I think that's about it. I'm not knocking the Beatles. Ringo could have been on his own and done very well. George Harrison was the best guitar player, and actually, I always said I knew that John and Paul was doing great. In fact, when John was assassinated, Paul was with their producer, the one that did all those great songs for the Beatles in New York, recording new stuff, and Paul had the problem. He says, "What do you do? How do you beat the Beatles? How do you get better than the Beatles?" And okay. And then George actually, for 1 year, 1971, 72, 73, he had his own album that was better, more popular than John and Paul's album for that year, and that was really good. And of course, John, they tried to kill him. George. They come to his house, and they stabbed him several times. And his wife got a poker from the fireplace and beat him. That's only saved George's life. But what killed George is a heavy smoker, and he passed away in 2001. Okay, a recap. The Beatles would have never been the Beatles without John Lennon. John Lennon was a quarryman in 1956 or so. He met Paul McCartney and started writing songs together. George came through Paul, and Richard Starkey became Richard Starr. Ringo Starr was a session musician. It just all worked together. The Beatles met Elvis Presley, and no problem. Oh, okay, I'm a big Bob Dylan fan. I heard Bob Dylan had a lot of influence, and Bob Dylan's the one who introduced them to marijuana. That's what I heard. Okay, check out the Rubber Soul album. When the Beatles first started out, they were just writing songs to the fans. Thank you, Love Me Do, and little bubblegum songs. And Rubber Soul is more deep, because the Beatles loved Bob Dylan, and so did Jimi Hendrix. Loved Bob Dylan, and Bob Dylan told him, write something a little bit deeper, something more, and check out the Rubber Soul album. That's a lot of Bob Dylan's influence. Bob Dylan's son is doing good too. Is a great singer-songwriter. Bob Dylan is one of the greatest songwriters who ever lived. He's still around, and he's just Bob Dylan. My big idols in life are Bob Dylan, Neil Young, John Lennon, which I loved all the Beatles, John Lennon, and George Strait. And George Strait didn't. George Strait heard a lot of my songs and recorded 11 of my songs, but never made to a CD, so that's the way it goes. But they were good enough for him to listen to, and I hope people like these educational videos I do. It takes a lot of research. This one here, I wrote that stuff down and didn't even look at it. Okay, Bob Wilson. Oh, I'm not cutting my hair because of the pandemic. I'll be 70. I'm in that age group of getting killed, from the virus. So I guess I'll become a hippie, and I think all people. And I wrote a song that says everyone's a hippie. If you believe in peace and love, if you believe in our environment, in taking care of the earth, then you're a hippie too. Peace out. the Wild Wilson Nation.